Hi everyone, welcome to this new edition of The Water Show. As you see, we're having good fun because we're remembering some of our memories from Copenhagen. We saw ourselves not that long ago, Björn. But hi Björn, how are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty fine. Hello Antoine, you look familiar, so not a long time ago, right? So beautiful place here. Where are we?
Actually, we are in Privatization, which is interesting for many reasons, and Björn is going to make bad jokes about it, I'm pretty sure, right? You're tempted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you came to that, but we are very close to Vetsicon, which is a utility we talked about in our absolute first edition, which was a utility which had to decide whether it goes for ozone or for activated carbon to treat the micropollutants.
See, I can read his mind. I know he's going to joke about me. But today it's not going to be about micropollutants because I don't want to prove Björn wrong again. We've done that by the first episode of that show. No, okay, sorry. But today we will be opening the show with an editorial by Björn, and that editorial is going to be about...
Well, I will talk about the utilities and how the privatization of the utilities failed over the last years.
Interesting.
Yes.
We might disagree on that one, but I'll lead then into my top three, and my top three is going to be about three numbers, which leads us to maybe rethink the way we look at utilities in the future.
So it's also about utilities?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So we haven't discussed that earlier.
Yeah, people would think that's rigged, but it's not. Actually, we are discovering the topics when we discuss like that.
Exactly.
And yeah, interesting.
Absolutely. So what is the main section
Maybe
about?
it has to do with the fact that we met interesting utilities in Copenhagen. That might be a hint. But
Could
okay,
be.
the main section is going to be about a book that we both read, and actually the book is the tip of the iceberg, and we wanted to go a bit deeper into the topic, and the book is
The Fourth Phase of Water by
Gerald Pollack.
Gerald Pollack, sorry for that. And yeah, it is really about, we all know the three phases, and this is really about the fourth phase. And we want to discover with our guest today, we have a guest, we want to discuss whether this phase is real, or is it a hoax, or is it something in the middle, or what is it about?
And yeah, and beyond that fourth phase, whenever you bring the topic of fourth phase, people look at you with a puzzled eye, like we were at school, like we learned that there's only three phases. What are you talking about? And then the full question is, where does science stop? And when does belief start? And that is also something we'd like to discuss with our special guest,
Absolutely.
which we will reveal in some minutes. For now, let's go inside and let's have a look at your editorial, Björn. I'm curious.
Please, let's do. I'm ready.
So hi everyone and welcome to this main part of the show, and we will be starting, as you get used to, with Björn's editorial in just a second. I'm really curious about it, I hope you're too. If you have an idea about what he will be rambling around, just tell it in the comments, and Björn, the scene is yours.
Thank you very much, Antoine. So what I'm talking today is about, that privatization of our water utilities is proven it isn't worse. So think about that, what happened. 90% of all water utilities we have, or call it also wastewater utilities, 90% of all of them, they are not privatized, they are in public hand, right? So there was a trend 20, 30 years ago. Everybody went for privatization, right? Best example? Well, UK, we all know that, right? So in 1989, there was a law, or not really a law, but there was the idea by Margaret Thatcher. And she said, all our water utilities, we should privatize that. So that's what happened, right? Completely debt-free and free of charge. They gave it to, I think, 10 or 12 at this time, companies who could get these kind of water utilities. 30 years back, later, what happened? I don't think that I see UK as, let's say, top ranked in the water utilities somewhere in Europe. For instance, take the example, non-revenue water. What is the percentage they have in non-revenue water? It's about 13% and even more, right? So that means about
13 or 30?
13, 1-3.
1-3, okay.
Yeah. So it's just one example, right? It's just one, even France is even worse, but we don't want to talk about that. But because
13 is not that bad.
Yeah, but think about countries, for instance, Denmark, Netherlands, or Germany. They have 6 to 7, right? This is just one example. What happened in the UK is, everything was just driven on what? On profit. So the infrastructure, there was no really investment in infrastructure even more. So let's say there was a lack of, I wouldn't say competence, but let's say who took over all the utilities? Investment funds, private companies, who were not really in the field of water. So that's what happened. But I don't want to, ride all the time on UK. I can also go to your country, which is France. They started even earlier. They started in the 1850s to privatize all of these water utilities. Because what happened then? Big companies as Veolia, Sauer, or even Suez came out of that game. That was the beginning of everything. So, but what have we seen over the last years? Paris, Bordeaux, they all came back from privatization. They all were back in
That is not true.
They all back.
It is a cycle. It is true that they came back recently, but if you look over the history, they came back and forth 4 or 5 times, and there's a story about that.
But you have to look on the entire trend. Think also, okay, you don't want to talk about France? Fine.
I'm just thinking, who's the political board of those municipalities? They are all green, and that's the reason why they take it back. And when they go back to someone from the right side, then they will give it back to the private. It was always the case over the past century.
Okay, same with Germany. Same with Germany. Think about that. For instance, in 1889, Berlin Wasser sold 49% of the rights to a private company. Do you know which one it was? Vivendi was part of that. The other part was Veolia, right? So they sold 49% of that.
Vivendi, Veolia, that's the same company.
Yeah, maybe now, but at this time in 89, they were not. There was Vivendi and there was Veolia. Vivendi was just, the operation arm, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I would think so. That is what my research. But don't write on that. They sold 49% on the rights to private equity companies. 89, they had a profit of 80 million, not euros, it was at this time German marks, but pretty high profit. Just a couple of years later, they were totally in loss. Why is that? Because of the contract. They had a contract that the private owner had to get profit out of that no matter what. So what happened? The people started going against this contract, and nowadays Wasser Berlin had to get chairs back to be again the majority leader. I think they are now 60-70% or even more, right? And they have to push back all that out because of the pressure by the people. Because even that has proven that it doesn't work. Think about, let's say, my hometown or close to my hometown, which is Rostock. There was a concession for 25 years to Remondis. 25 years. 2 years back, they started thinking, okay, we want to have it back in our hand and no longer in private hand. Because they all just want to maximize the profit. They all want to maximize the profit, and the result is that prices increasing. The invest in infrastructure, well, we all know that. I have given the examples once about Germany. It's really lacking. And the results are not that good. So more and more the trend, that's what we see in the market. You can look at UK, you can look at France, you can look at somewhere else. They all go back from privatization because everything came from the 80s, 90s because of the liberalization. But there are also other examples.
I think you're widely wrong, but
think about the for instance the Netherlands. What happened in the Netherlands? They gave a law by 2004 that this will never happen. They placed a law for that you can't privatize the water utilities. Even, for instance, some cities, for instance, Hamburg, a place in Germany, right in the north. Even they have a law in place that you are not allowed to privatize the water utilities. So that is also the other trend you can see, that more and more the utilities taking back their own utility and taking back the concession rights from the privates.
So that's what you call a trend. You take a couple of first world European country and you say that is a trend. Interesting. I'll let you finish.
I'm almost finished. I mean, what we can also see, this is a little bit another trend, and we discussed this with Aarhus Water in Copenhagen. We asked them, one of the last questions was, what is a trend? What about the utilities? I mean, we have 6,000 utilities in Germany. We have 50,000 utilities in the US, but we have 13, for instance, water and wastewater in UK.
17.
It depends a little bit how you count that. We have 10 in the Netherlands. We have tons in France. So what is the trend? And the trend is also that they become bigger due to the fact that they need the competences. They need to have, let's say, to share their knowledge. It is easier to operate from a bigger perspective as to give all the water utilities to the local communities, to the local towns, which supply water to 3,000 people. Who is taking care about that? The mayor. The mayor is responsible for the water. And what about the knowledge of the people who run the utility? That's what we see also, that the utilities become bigger and bigger and bigger. We see that in Denmark. We have seen that in the Netherlands. We see this more and more in Germany. We have seen this in Spain with Acciona and all the other companies. So this is another trend. I would say it is worse that we strive for that. So that's what I've seen over the last, years.
Okay, on the last part, let's start with the last part.
Okay.
I would agree with you. Consolidation is a good thing, and consolidation will enable to have economies of scale. But that is, to me, also something which is quite up for debate, because you are building bigger utilities, but I think those utilities have to change their role, and that is something I will discuss in my top 3, which is pretty funny because, again,
Really?
we didn't prepare that. I mean, we are making a surprise each other with those parts, and interestingly, they go in similar directions.
Interesting.
On the privatization, I strongly disagree with you, because I wouldn't say that this is good or bad. No one to say that. I wouldn't even say it's a trend, because you're citing some countries, and probably you're right to a certain extent. I wouldn't say that France is a trend, but that is another discussion. But if you look at other countries like Saudi Arabia, like
I'm talking just about industrial countries. I'm not talking about Mexico. This failed. Indonesia totally failed.
Okay, then let's take the US.
I'm talking just about the home turf. I'm pretty no. Right, pretty well no.
Okay, so you're saying it's a trend about the 4 countries which you're very familiar with.
No,
it's interesting.
I'm saying it's a trend, for instance, in industrial countries, especially in Europe, what we see. That's what we see. I mean, 30 years ago, we had the liberalization because of the energy, about the telecommunication, as well about the gas market. And in the same spot, the water utilities jumped in and they privatized a couple of the utilities. For instance, to Veolia, to all the big players, right?
I think you're mixing stuff.
They are coming back and taking back the rights to take over the control over the water utilities.
I think you're mixing stuff, because really there is not this black and white as you describe. It's not like fully privatized or fully public. I think the right thing is in between, and that's the real trend we see out there, which is the private-public partnership. PPP projects are the number one way nowadays to do a new project when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to these kind of utilities, and not only in the developing world, in many countries that's the case. And there are few exceptions to that rule. You're right, the UK is a full exception to that rule. They're fully privatized. And on the other hand of the scope, I would say there's Singapore, which is the other full exception to that rule, where everything is public.
Yeah, but you don't have to go that far. Even the Netherlands, as I said, they have the law. You can't go private. It is not allowed. Full stop. And you have just 10 utilities, but they are responsible for the entire.
That is up for debate. It's like when you say in France, EDF for long until last year was doing the full electricity and was private company, but with the state as 87% shareholder. So is it a private or public company? And the same is true in the Netherlands. If you take a Vitens, if you take these kind of companies, an Alliander, how are they public or private? I mean, it's a public company under private laws. So that's somehow what I'm saying with the private-public partnership. So I would be cautious by saying that privatization is really a bad thing. And there's something which I would be even more cautious, which is you're saying they do all for profit, and that's bad.
No,
and
I'm not saying that.
I
mean, it's
water
never.
Water has to be profitable, regardless of its private, public, a mix or whatever. Water has to be profitable. The point where you're right is that you shouldn't go over the top with the profits, in the sense that you should not do profit to the detriment of your service.
But isn't that what we have actually have seen in the UK, for instance, where everything is 100% privatized?
You gave the example of Paris, which to me is a good example to that extent, because depending...
You're jumping from the UK to Paris.
Because actually Paris is interesting, because depending...
Well, it was privatized and now it's back.
Depending on which people you're talking with, you're going to tell a fully different story. The story you hear usually when you're talking with Suez or Veolia, because usually it's Suez gets it, then it's public, Veolia gets it, then it's public, and so far and so on. It's really a cycle. But if you talk with those private companies, what they will tell you is that they take a situation which is horrible, like leaks everywhere, low quality of service. So they ramp it up for the duration of their contract. And to ramp it up, they need more money, so they are raising the prices, and so they bring a high quality of service. And when they bring that high quality of service, then the municipality takes it back, because now it's good, they can just live on it for 20 years. And I think both stories might be wrong, but most stories have to be listened to, and I think the truth is somewhere in between.
Okay, but let's take just this one, let's take just one figure, the non-revenue water. which gives you a little bit an idea how good the infrastructure is. What is the number in France?
Which gives you an idea of
it's
how
23%
that's
non-revenue
nonsense.
water.
That's,
But
I mean,
that's all
giving
about the
a country
infrastructure.
number is a nonsense. If you take Paris, for instance, they have 0.5%. Why? Because everything is in very big canals underground and nobody is measuring anything. So then you have good numbers. I mean, you can do a full theory about that.
So what you're saying is the numbers we get non-revenue, for instance, the 23 from France or the 13 from UK or the 7 from Germany, they're all bullshit?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. For a very simple reason, which is first, you only know what you measure.
Sure.
And then you only know about the measurements which get reported. So I would assume that aside from very specific exceptions like, again, Singapore, most of the numbers we hear are all underestimated for a very simple reason. If you're a bad pupil, you will not measure, and if you measure, you will not communicate. So if you look, there's a very interesting case about that in David Lloyd Owen's book, Global Water Funding, where he explains how many countries have not that bad numbers, but when you look into the details of it, there's like 17 utilities reporting out of several hundred. And I'm not saying the numbers are total bullshit. I'm just saying that it's an indication.
Exactly.
Take it like an indication.
Okay, but let's say if we take the 23% as indication, so you are saying it is good that there was a mix all the time from, I mean, you gave the example. Let's say Veolia take over Paris and they had to increase the tariffs because they wanted to invest into the infrastructure. Then the next party is coming, they want to invest into infrastructure to increase the number. But in the end, the result, the indication number, we said it right now, is 20% in non-revenue water. So would you say it is a good example of that it works? Is non-revenue water the number one
North Star metric? Is it really that number? That's the most relevant.
It's just one number to talk about.
How often do you breach quality in terms of water, in drinking water? Do you have that number? I mean, what's the connection rate of people?
Is it a little bit because, let's say, you want to defend France, or is it, let's say, you want to defend the system?
Not at all. I'm really a firm believer that the future lies in private-public partnerships with a high strength to the private part. So
but then
I wouldn't call the UK a failure at all. The UK has succeeded in taking a situation which wasn't that good and bring it to a level where every single of these private big utilities has the means to invest in R&D, in innovation, in new projects, which is not the case in many of the municipal utilities you see. So maybe, honestly, I wouldn't care if a consolidated utility is private or public, as long as they operate the same way.
So you would say that UK, for instance, the water utilities in UK, they are somehow the North Star in let's say to look for. I mean, I remember that we have been to Copenhagen, that we talked about that Scandinavia is somehow the North Star, and I don't see that they are 100% privatized as they are in UK, and they are ranked all the time somewhere on the top. So I think there must be a balance.
No, but they are big. They are big. They are allowed to charge. I mean,
in the UK,
you're saying
big.
that an indicator is the price.
We have 13 utilities in the UK, so they are also big. They're serving 50 million people. Come on.
But that's what I'm saying.
It's the same.
You're comparing to Denmark, and then you're saying that all private companies, they charge really high rates. And we were in Denmark, and who has the highest rates in the world? Denmark.
Exactly.
And it's public companies.
But let's say go back a little bit just to the indicator number. We said non-revenue water. Therefore, it is 6%.
That is one indicator.
Exactly. But if you take all the others, you don't find UK always on the top. You always find Scandinavia, for instance, on the top.
Okay, I'll give you an example. When I had the discussion on that microphone with one of my colleagues, Olivier Narbet, who's the best specialist I know when it comes to non-revenue water. And I was bouncing at him all these numbers. And at some point he was laughing and he was saying, he used to be working in Azerbaijan and he was trying to reduce non-revenue water there. And they were not measuring because they just had an abundance of water. So whenever there was too much leaks in the system, they would just open a new line and more water was flowing down from the mountain. And then they were having enough water. And he said over the years he was working in Azerbaijan, he was able to bring non-revenue water down from 90% to 70%. Which just gives you an idea of how much water was leaking out. And to me, the rationale of that story is the following, is that when you don't have a water scarcity problem, which is the case in many places in France, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how we want to see it, then non-revenue water is not the right indicator. I think when you're going to water distribution, which is what you're looking at and aiming at, apparently, I would say that water quality is the real good indicator. And how often do you have cases of bad quality in the countries we were just mentioning? Not that often. And I'll not spoil my number because that's one of the numbers I'll take in my top 3. But there's a counterexample in a country which arguably has even more money than all the ones we've talked about.
Do you know? And over the last decade, the UK water utilities, they paid in fines because of quality of water, leakage, a lot of things. 500 billion in a decade.
And what's wrong with that?
With
It's a
500 billion?
It's a private company. They do something wrong, they get to pay a fine. It seems to me like the system works.
No, what happened then? They go back. I mean, how do they get the money back? Come on. They go to the people who have to pay for the water. That's all they do.
It's the basic of economics. You need to have
all I'm saying,
a balance between offer and demand
all I'm
and
saying,
price.
My point here is that you have maybe everything is privatized. Maybe it is a little bit privatized over the edge because of investment companies, investment group from overseas, which have no clue about water. They just want to get profit as much as possible out of that. I agree. We all have to do profit. That's fine. But you don't have to forget, to invest also. That you have to find the balance. And it looks like that the UK is a little bit over the edge. Would you agree on that?
I wouldn't agree on that, no. And actually, last week I was discussing with Seth Siegel, and I will ask him, or even I will pay for that, so that he sends you a dedicated copy of his book, Troubled Water, What's Wrong with What We Drink. And you'll see the full explanation as to why profits in water would be a really good thing.
I never go against
under
that.
the full authority of the mayors, which have always a good incentive to never raise the price because you never win an election because you raise the price.
You don't get the point.
You don't get the point either. I'm just saying it's not black or white. I'm saying it's shades of gray, and you cannot say it's, the bad is they're private and the good is they are public.
Absolutely
that's
not.
Fully true.
But the trend is that more and more cities, local communities are going back. If they are privatized, that they are going back. Which
data do you say more and more?
Well, that's what I told you. I've seen a couple of datas where they are coming back.
Like climate change. Today it's cold, so climate change doesn't exist. No, that's the same. It's not because you saw some things that it's a generality and it's true. I think the trend is rather in the other direction. It goes towards PPP.
Never ever. I'm not talking about PPP, but I'm talking about totally privatization. That's what I'm talking about. That privatization, 100% privatization of water utilities, it has proven that it doesn't work in our industry.
Okay, I need some additional data. I don't want, because I'm absolutely sure you're wrong and you're absolutely sure that you're right. So Let's say if you have that data about what's the rate of privatization, so 100% privatization versus what's the rate of public, 100% public. If you have that data, share it with us. I'd like to have the real data worldwide, not just a full country Björn loves to talk about.
Globally, 90%, everything is not privatized. 90% of all water utilities.
So how is that a trend?
Well, years before, it was more. That is a trend.
Okay, I'll double check the number. I don't believe that just because he says it. But
as always, you don't believe that.
On the consolidation level, I would say that is where we should agree for once, because you mentioned these numbers. 50,000 utilities. That's just the water utilities in the US. You take on top of that the wastewater utilities. That makes 90,000 utilities in total in the US. You have 700 wastewater utilities in Switzerland, where we are sitting today, which to the scale of the country is some of a nonsense. And there's a country effort right now to close the smallest one and to bring them together with the big one. So probably there's some sense in that.
Think about that. In the UK, these 13, you have 13. I talked about 13, you said 17. How many people they serve? 55 million. Take the 60,000 utilities we have. They serve to 82. This balance doesn't make any sense, right? This ratio. So that means you have 6,000 for 82 and you have 13 for 55. And it works, that you get quality to the people. So that makes definitely no sense. And a true story, years ago, directly after study, I went to one of these water reservoirs, right? And all these water reservoirs and small water works, as I said, we're driven by the local government, by the local municipality. There were people which, they were responsible for the streets, for the grave, for everything, and also for the water reservoir. So we lowered down the water because we wanted to check the concrete. And we found so much stuff inside the water, in the water reservoir, where I really thought, well, is that really the quality I would love to have? It is just an example. We will not find it everywhere. But the point is really give that into the hands of people who have really knowledge about what they do.
I'll close with a last thought, just because that is now it's an anecdote. We are sitting right now in Privatization, right? So if you flush...
Close to Wetzikon, right?
If you flush your water here, it goes to the Araneugut in Dübendorf. And the Araneugut in Dübendorf is probably the most advanced wastewater utility I've ever met, ever worked with. They have been doing every single research project. They have been advancing the science of micropollutant removal. And they are really, really, really bringing the full topic forward all the time. And they are a private company, which is acting under a delegation of public service. So it is the best example you can find, and it is a fully private company. So I would say mic drop, but I cannot because it's on a stand. But I'd be really interested to be wrong, honestly. If you can prove me with the data that there is really a trend, then I would say we have even more of a problem in the world than I thought when it comes to water, because we're doing it wrong.
Do we?
Yeah.
Okay, let's check that out.
Good, but we can continue the discussion in the next part, because actually you'll see that there's a strong link with what I'll be covering in my top 3. Hey, so as I promised, this is the top 3, which is a bit special today because it's a top 3 in, I would say, no specific order. It is just 3 numbers, which are then something I'd like to discuss with you. And you'll see that it's interesting because, again, people will think it's rigged, but it's not.
Definitely not.
So it goes in the same direction than what we were debating right now. So my first number is actually 1 versus 5. And that 1 versus 5 is the ratio that the non-profit organization Dig Deep has been showing to be the return rate of $1 you invest into water. Someone has no access to water. You bring that someone water and you win back $5. Why is that number interesting? Because it's not the first time there's a figure. There have been 1-to-3 ratios, which have been given by water.org. Global Water Intelligence has made several studies to show that it's profitable, generally speaking, to invest in people having water. But I'm just taking this 1-to-5 because it's pretty spectacular. And it tells a story, which is bringing water to people is not a charity move. Bringing water to people is a very clever economic move. And once you get that lens, then it's a matter of how do you find the best shape to collect that profit. Because as a society, we have to collect that profit. Because right now, our utility approach is that the utility is bringing the water to people and charging for the water. But if the people don't go to the hospital, if the people don't need to lose so much school time and so far and so on, the utility doesn't get a cent back from that money, which is what economists called the wrong pockets problem or wrong pockets dilemma. So I'm not going into all the details of that, but what I'm trying to hint at here is that maybe there's a different way to deal with water where the people which are investing into that water, the one which are bringing that $1, get a better share of the $5 feedback. And that is then a strong incentive to do better.
Okay, two questions. First of all, I mean, the 1-to-5 or 1-to-3, whatever the ratio is, I mean, both are very positive, right? So the question is really, is it also for the industrial countries or is it just for the country which needs to get developed?
1-to-5 is a study from the US in the US.
In the US, so
Yes.
that means, okay. But
1-to-3 is more generally water.org was looking at the entire world, and GWI was just saying it's cash positive wherever you are in the world.
Pretty interesting. I mean, the other point is, I mean, you said, let's say the water utilities get their water just by the tariffs, which is somehow right, because you have also the case, for instance, in Germany, the part of your tax going to the local community, and they use this tax also to invest into the water utilities. So it's a, let's say, two-sided
act, yeah.
Whatever that is, right? That means there are 2 ways to get the money for the water utilities. So it's not only the 1.3 or the 1.5.
But this time looking at the revenue, not at the way they get the money, it's the way they get these $5 back. I mean, they have one-off costs, so they will charge the 1 plus some coping costs because you have some energy. So most of the time they will get 1.2 for 1, which makes it quite hard to sustain the opening of new lines. Whereas if you get a share of the 5, that's a different story.
But let's say if the math is that easy, what is the issue? Why not investing? I mean, it takes a lot of money, but let's say if you get 1 to 5, let's say over the period of, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years after investment, it is normally a no-brainer. but the reality is different.
No, because the problem is, in what would you invest today? You would invest in a central utility, and by definition, because of this wrong pockets problem, the central utility cannot collect the 5. Because unless the central utility is really like North Korea, in which case everything goes under one hat, which is the state, then it is hard to have everybody having their pockets aligned. I mean, if all of a sudden I deliver good water quality to the people, which means they go less to the hospital is not going to pay me back because it doesn't need to have to have those people inside their beds. I'm coming back to that because...
So that means, but the revenue then is what? Is just based on tariffs or based also on better life, for instance, that I don't have to spend the money, for instance, at the hospital, that I can
the revenue
work longer.
Exactly.
I mean, that is the other case, right?
You have more working hours, you have more people who are able to work, to go to studies, you have less people in the hospitals.
But then 1.5 is somehow weird from my perspective. Because who is getting the 5 back? The one who's investing the 1?
No, that's the wrong pockets problem. The people getting back the 5 are not the people investing the 1. That is the full dilemma. Unless we find a better way to do that. Okay. Which is going to be my third number. But before that, I have my second number. My second number is 44 million, and which comes with a second number, which is 2.2 million. Do you know what that refers to?
44 and 2.4.
2.2.
2.2 access to water. That is somehow
that
the number.
Has to do, but it's million, not billion, so it's not worldwide. Okay. Actually, 2.2 million people. It's the number of people in the United States.
You're talking just about the US.
The richest country in the world who have zero access to water inside their homes or in their neighboring communities. So those are people who 100% rely on bottled water and trucked water for their living.
2.2 million
in the US alone. And those are people with no plumbing, no nothing inside the house, which means that there is no network existing, there is no connection existing, and so wherever you want to start...
Is it households or what is that?
It's people.
So what that means, the people who are living, let's say, for instance, in San Francisco on the streets, in the tent, they don't have any access to water.
Yes.
So they are counted.
That's the reason why the study says at least 2.2 million, because that is the one we know. But there are more people which are living in the street, which are and that brings the numbers.
But it's
higher.
not household. But let's say if you would tell me that 2.2 million households in the US are not having access to water, it is not the same.
It is not 2.2 million households just because there's more than one people in the household, but there are lots of households in those 2.2 million. For instance, if you are a Native American, you have 19 times more risk to have no water than if you're a white family.
Okay.
And if you're a Black or Latino, you have 2 to 3 times more chances, which is a terrible way to express it, to have no access to water than white. So there is a sociological aspect to that number. And of course, the Navajo Nation or the Appalachians Nation, those are the most impacted by this 2.2 million. But my other number is interesting as well. The 44 million, that's the number of Americans which are served by water, which has been breaching the Clean Water Act safety quality guidelines over the past 5 to 10 years. Which means a case like
once or twice or multiple times or
at least once. I mean, it can be the extreme case like Flint, Michigan, where we do know, but actually consider that 44 million, that's 15% of the population, again, in the richest country in the world, which are exposed to problem with water quality.
So you're wondering about that number, really?
I'm really wondering about that number, don't you?
No, not at all, because it happens all the time. It happens all the time. And they have to inform the people if that is really, let's say, if you have, for instance, take the stupid example, you have bacteria inside the water due to whatever, right? It can happen.
It should not.
Yeah, but it can happen.
But it should not.
It can happen, and it happens all the time.
But it should not.
I think a year ago was the last time that I have realized this in my hometown. I live somewhere in the middle of Germany, right?
So you boiled the water in your hometown?
Exactly.
And you find it absolutely normal?
No, I didn't find it normal, but let's say that is the case why you have to live with that. Otherwise, what is the solution for that?
That's interesting. Maybe it's because you're German and you say the system is like that. Let's keep within the system. And I'm French and I'm more wanting to riot against it. But if I would have to boil my water, honestly, at some point I would say the system doesn't work.
Yeah, but the system works. But from time to time, it can happen that a failure occurs. I mean, think about that. I mean, the electricity goes off because there's a construction and one guy did a mistake. So would you say, well, the system failed? It's the same. It's
a fully different story.
Wait. No, it's not. It's the same. If the construction on the network is ongoing and something happened with a pipe. They took a pipe which was contaminated. It was one person who did a failure, who installed this pipe. It was contaminated, and that's why it happened. So would you say that's
it's a fully different story.
Failed? No,
when electricity goes down,
but it's the same story.
When electricity goes down, you want to put your light on, and there's no light.
Okay.
So there's no risk. When water is of bad quality, you don't know, you drink it. So you knew about it because they informed you. But how often does it happen and nobody informs you? And then you're drinking something which might be of bad quality. And what do we see?
Then we have a different, that's a totally different story.
Let's keep the US story. In California, 80% of people don't drink tap water. Why? Because they don't believe that tap water is of sufficient quality.
Exactly.
So that means that it's not 80% failure rate. Most of the time, and probably in California, even lower than the average in the full US, that water is of perfect quality, but people still go and invest into bottled water, which is 100 to 300 times more expensive. So that shows that we are not, as a sector, providing the right guarantees that when you're drinking from the tap, it's of the right quality. And that, to me, is a failure that we should be solving.
Okay, but let's say it is the same. It's the same. We are all humans. We are all humans. Failure can happen. Someone pressed the wrong button and something happened. And it could affect that it goes into our network. It could affect that it is somewhere in the construction that someone dies because there was an accident because someone pressed the wrong button. We are all humans. It can happen. And take back the example. The most often reason why we have contamination in our network is because of construction work. They are going to the network, they have to exchange the pipes, you know, because you're a pipe guy, and you have to disinfect the pipe before going in, right? You have to do this with all the things. I mean, I did this at Akima, right? With the Googles. And if something goes wrong, you have a contamination, then you flush it, then you put chemicals into that, but something happened for whatever reason. It goes to the network and people get it out of the tap. It can happen, but it is a human failure. It is not a failure of a system.
Okay, first, if you do it right, that never happens. If you don't want to do it wrong, then come. I'll tell you how to do it right. I know the people who can train you. But that's just because.
But that's it. Honestly,
no. But jokes aside,
that's a piping. Not a piping.
I'm not saying that the system can never fail, and failure should always be allowed. I'm saying that if the system fails, you need to have a fail-safe protection, which is how do you prevent people from drinking water they should not be drinking. And so one way to do that might be to put a water tap, a water faucet, which just lights green when the water is good and red when the water is not good.
Yeah, okay. And
a science fiction dream from...
And it doesn't work. It fails because someone... assembled it wrong. It is again a human failure.
If you let me finish my sentence, you understand that I'm saying that is something which has been dreamed by many and which is probably not the right solution. So I have another indicator, which is my third number, which just gives us a hint at what is really happening out there.
But the issue, I mean, you're addressing a right issue, but isn't the issue? I mean, what is the issue we have? It is about contamination, right? It is about contamination, and what harms us is bacteria contamination, or if we have virus in our water,
or lead, or heavy metals, or arsenic,
well, let's say, but 99% is about bacteria.
I wouldn't say 99%.
Okay, but let's say the majority. Okay, call it this way.
I'm not even sure about majority.
100%. But the issue there is that we still rely on tests, which take 3 days. That is an issue.
I did a plug for GF, so he's making a plug for Orb.
No. I mean, it's not for Orb. It's really talk about sensory. Really. I mean, go. If we want to know what is inside the water. So what does the water work do? What does water work does? It takes a sample, give it to the lab. We have. I did this in my university time. It takes 3 days to get a result,
Absolutely.
and then I'm saying yes or no. But meanwhile, the water is already distributed, and that's why the fire department is coming to my town and is saying, please boil your water. That's how it works.
And that is as well. You have in China a big market, like a multi-billion market for what they call secondary drinking water monitoring, which is basically whatever happens in the network Okay, all
Don't
good.
care.
We're not sure we trust about that.
We
but
do
in
it
the
at home.
basement of the no wait, in the basement of the building, there is a sensor which is measuring, and then only maybe you do something. But all these buildings are equipping themselves with sensors in the basement to try to measure that.
It's the same. I had a call last week with a guy who wants to clean all the water from the tap, and I said, well, the market most probably is not here. The market is over there, because in Asia or in India, everybody has this reverse osmosis system.
And that brings me. Let me just give.
And that is a question. Is that really
You don't
worse?
want me to watch of my third number, but exactly.
It is can we next episode? Can we have this as main section? That would be great.
Maybe. But my third number is exactly what you were saying. This under the sink, so point of entry or point of use treatments. What is the market for that? Do you have a feeling for that? Because honestly, I was feeling it's big, but I wasn't feeling it was that big. So how much would you say?
I can't give you a number, but let's say my feeling is that it is big in Europe, but even bigger outside Europe.
Actually, worldwide, it's $40 billion a year, the investment in those point of entry, point of use filters. And so the full question that tells is, does it still make sense? And see, that's the bridge with what we were discussing before. Does it still make sense to invest in large-scale utilities? Because a large-scale utility cannot benefit from the 1-to-5 ratio, because wrong pockets, by design, they cannot take the 5. A large utility is not the right approach in places which right now are not in the network. Because if you already have existing networks and you need to add a new branch to that new branch will mean you need to redesign the full rest of the network, which means that the cost to connect the people who right now don't have any connection are much higher, because you have to compound in all the other costs of whatever is happening in the system. And the third thing is, if you go for the central utility, you still have these billions going into a different solution, because people don't really trust those utilities. So what if we say, all of a sudden, we fully change the role of the utility? The utility has no longer the duty to have these big pipe networks, because pipes and pumps for utility represent 75% of their costs. So they don't have that anymore. Their duty is to help the people to have safe water at home. It might be by helping them to sensing that water, it might be to helping them set up this, but we really go for small scale treatments under the sink of point of entry, point of use. And if we do that, the people investing in that would be the households or the local communities. And the household and the local communities, they will benefit from the 5-to-1. Because they are the ones, if they invest $1 to have good water, they don't spend the other $3 to go to the hospital, and they can go to work because they are not sick, and they can send their people to school because they don't need to look for water, and they don't need anymore to buy bottled water or trucked water, which we do know is hundreds times more expensive than that water they will have under the sink. So isn't that the new scale of the topic? Isn't that really trying to turn a big infrastructure industry into a distributed and decentralized, localized solution, which is still connected in a distributed and digital way to people who are the specialists and can be like the watchdogs?
Okay, let me be a little bit philosophical. What is the number one goal for each and every country? To keep the people healthy. Why? We need to ensure that they can go to work, that the GDP is going every year high. That is one of the goals. Nobody will talk about that, but it's one of the goals.
That is
right?
very German, but
yeah,
yes.
but it is. We have to ensure that you and you and you, that you all have to go to work, because the company needs to create profit, that the GDPR for the entire country gets up. That is all about. So what you're saying right now is we should care about ourselves by implementing something under the thing to ensure that we are healthy. So the government will never play that game. Why? Because then it is on me to ensure that I stay healthy because of water. So, and if I'm not, let's say, I don't care or I don't invest so much because, then we have 10 solutions. One, let's say, is cheap one. Another one is more expensive, right? And maybe I can afford just the middle. And I don't do the maintenance good enough, and then I get sick. So what happened? I'm not able to invest into the GDP.
I raised that question to Seth Siegel when we had that discussion. And what he answered was 97% of humanity has smartphones.
True.
So it would be quite easy in this technological age to have smartphone alerts which tells you have been filling 200 pitchers of water. That's the limit for your filter. Exchange your filter. or you haven't been doing your maintenance for 2 years, you should now do your maintenance.
I give you an example. I have two.
It's not from one day to the other.
No. I have two air filters in my home, and from time to time, this is. I mean, there are three filters in normal sieve. Then I have activated carbon, and I have this kind of against virus HEPA filter. And he told me recently, hey, you have to exchange the activated carbon filter. And I was thinking, damn, I haven't ordered this one. So what do? I press a button on the machine that I exchange that, and then he's running again. So and in the meantime, all I'm saying is I can come over that.
I'm just saying the system as we know it has failed. And
you are saying the utility system we have right now in place failed totally.
I'm not again. You're saying black and white. I'm saying it is not working the way it should be working. When you see that in our very developed countries, we don't have a 100% access to water for everybody. And I'm not speaking here of all the countries where water in the household is a dream, which they expect to come true since decades, and we keep failing them at not providing them with water. So when you see that, I do believe it's time to look for other solutions. But I'm still not fully convinced, honestly, with the point of views approach.
Me neither.
For the reasons you're mentioning. It has the beauty of the water fit for purpose, because that means you would have to just clean to the highest standards the water you drink, and then you wouldn't need to clean to high standards the water which used to flush the toilet. But it has the limit of what you said. You need to do your maintenance, and a filter itself might be doing more harm than good if you go over the lifetime of the filter. So it is tricky. I'm just putting those numbers here up for debate.
I think what we should have definitely is we should have the responsibility by the government to supply us with clean water standard. So that I can go to the tap, I can drink that, and I don't get sick. So that is the minimum requirement I have.
Which is not working.
Which is working. You drank that. Do you got sick? That was tap water.
I'm a firm believer of tap water. I gave tap water to my daughters and my son in baby bottles. I'm a firm believer in the system.
So what?
But I'm saying that if you want to take the full people on board, the full population on board, including the ones which not like us, which are not water engineers, you need to bring them this additional level of safety.
Exactly not.
15% is not acceptable. It is 0% when it comes to health, or 0 point something.
First of all, as I said, is humanity. So that means failure can happen. Right? It is a nightmare, but it can happen. But let's say to bring, something under the sink will not help to ensure that the people believe more in the water utility.
Then let's keep our pace. Let's keep our pace. And bottled water gets more investment than utility water, and everybody's fine with that. And then at one point, the utility is going to be in such a bad shape that we just have to avoid it. And then
that's exactly the pain point here. I discussed this in Valencia with a group of people. During the VAX conference. So I discussed that. So what can we do to educate the people what water is about, how safe water is, what you can do with that? And that is the issue. We have to tell the people in the US, for instance, if 80% doesn't drink the tap water, well, then we have to tell them how safe the tap water is. And that is an education issue. It is not a technology issue, or that we have to change that to something under the things.
To me,
they don't get the trust.
It's a marketing battle, but here we are. If we go into that, we are opening a new tangent, which I'm really happy to have you do, but at another time, because I think we're running out of time. But really, we should have that conversation. But for now, what I wanted to highlight here is that it is interesting sometimes to just go outside the box and to say, look, that's the facts, and maybe we can keep doing what we've been always doing and just do it slightly better, and maybe it works. Or maybe we can look at another side of the story and try a different approach. And I think that's somehow what we'll be discussing the deep dive. So to me, that was a smooth transition.
Yeah, but let's say I'm always going outside the box and you're always going against that. So think about you have to watch all the other episodes. We have recorded. I'm always... Guys, you know that, right?
The guy who said we need to go fully centralized in a full show is saying he's going outside the box. Come on.
I always bring new ideas to here. I'm always bringing new ideas, and you are, fighting against it. Anyway, whatever your opinion is,
That was a good joke.
Leave
That
us
was
a
a
message.
very good joke.
Leave us a message in the chat. Tell us whether he is right, whether we should have something on the sink, or whether we should more invest into
Look
really
how-
the utilities.
I never said that,
everybody
but-
can drink the tap water, and I think that's the goal. I hope you're with me.
It's funny how you always transform whatever I'm saying, but let's go to our deep dive. And our deep dive is going to be about these very special approaches and this full topic of going outside the box. So see you in a bit.
Okay, we are here today with the founder and CEO of EvoDrop, Fabio Hüter. Fabio, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you that we could be here to record our water show. What is EvoDrop about?
Thank you for the short introduction, Björn. EvoDrop is an engineering company based on different kind of water treatment and water filtration systems. I started that 6 years ago next to my mechanical engineering studies as a bachelor and master degree. At the end, EvoDrop 6 years later is more about private household, private customers, water filtration, anti-scaling devices without cells or chemicals. So, for example, water softening. We also have a field for swimming pools without chlorination, so a natural pool, water treatment for healthy skin and environment. We have also a field for agriculture, where we could lower the usage of fertilizers and pesticides in a natural way of plasma activation and electrolysis. And for example, we also have huge machine for doing desalination or water distillation for the industry, for example, supply chain, agriculture, food chains and stuff like that. And to summarize, we see us as engineering company. We have also other companies which want to solve a problem in different countries, different areas. We try to solve that also OEM products. We have premium products which we sell by ourselves and distributors. So try to face all the topics in the small scale, not like wastewater management. It's not our area. It's too huge for us. So everything which is based on small machines and the systems we try to solve and establish.
You covered a lot of things, right? A lot of technologies and applications. So I'm really excited to have our chat in a few minutes with you. Thank you very much for for having us here and for the introduction. Thank you, Fabio.
So Fabio, we just met you at the entrance of your building and you explained what EvoDrop is all about. And actually, we thought you might be a good interlocutor to take the next step into the discussion we had with Björn just before that section, which is how much outside of the box is too much outside of the box. And I think there's one specific topic which you wanted to take on.
Well, which is a book from Pollock, which is about the fourth phase of water. So from my understanding, what I learned in school, what I learned in university, we have three phases, right? We have solid, we have liquid, and we have the gas, the vapor phase. So, but he's coming out and saying, wow, there is a fourth phase of water. So, and in preparation for this show today, I checked all my literature. You know, I
Wait. You read the book?
Yeah, I read the book.
You read a book?
I mean, that's not the only book. Thank you for trusting me. I always also was listening to your podcast, by the way. Was the only one I have ever listened to.
It's a good one.
But anyway, but come back to the baseline is a little bit whatever book you look into, which is used for university or schools, you just find three phases. And yesterday I was talking to my 13-year-old son and he asked me what I'm going to do today. And I told him, well, we will be here, we will have our recordings and we will talk about water and we will talk about the fourth phase of water. And he told me, what is the fourth phase of water, Dad? And I was thinking, that's a good question. So what is the fourth phase of water? So Fabio, how would you describe the fourth phase of water?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I do not fully agree. Let's say with the EC zone, because if you talk about intracellular or extracellular water, I think it's a more like getting into a coherent domain state. So means coherence.
I'll just define easy is exclusion zone. So because we have to take people from their knowledge state.
Yeah.
So some of you might know it, not all of you. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah. Thank you. That's right. For the exclusive zone, for me, it's more like getting a coherence in the water. So the coherent domain means for me it's like coding, right? You have a code, and the water is more has its specific code, so that everyone or every single particle or molecule knows where it should be, and you build like a structure. Like the same is like for me, information, it's coming from the Latin word, it's like formation, right? So an information means for me it's a motion there, which everyone, it's the same like our cells, right? Our hands, or let's say our skin, it's the most outside of our body. After that, our body knows, okay, I cannot go more outside further, because
There's a
there the
boundary.
body stops. So there is air, and we have these hands, and it stops to build like the 5 fingers, and he knows that because it's information there from the DNA strength. And because we are so much of water, a lot of people think that we are just 70% out of water, but that's wrong. We are 99% out of water, right?
Because of the difference in mass between the cell and... Yeah.
Yes, definitely, yeah. But I mean, that's a really important part. And so that's why a lot of scientists say that because we have so much hydrogen in the universe, it's like the most common element, that this element must be a transmitter for information, because human beings are transmitters and antennas, right? It's really difficult to explain this, and you just have to summarize it in what I really like is like the state of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, and we dive into it for sure. Like Isaac Newton already told us, is what we know is a drop, and what we don't know is an ocean. The plaidoyer should be that we do not interrupt people by philosophizing about the difference of water, because we don't know it, right? We have to find.
When you say that we know what we know is a drop and what we don't know is an ocean, it is hard to swallow an ocean. You need to start with a drop. So where would you start to dive into that ocean of things we don't know?
I mean,
If the fourth phase topic isn't like the really...
We had a lot of other different scientists, right? And Jerry also mentioned that you had scientists from Russia, you had German scientists. Here we have like a guy, it's called like the Professor Dr. Wolfgang Ludwig, and he found out about the water polarity and the memory effect of water. Then we have like science.
There are many different things here. So you have the memory of water.
Yes. Yes, that's the point. But I want to mention that you have like, if you talk about the memory, about the consciousness, and about the easy is combining anything, right? Because when you talk about easy, means that this water have a memory, that this water has also consciousness,
because it's a semi-crystalline phase of water, and hence it could be having information or storing information what regular water could not. I'm trying to bring it down.
Definitely, because when he talks about the easy zones, he means that water has the information that it's now near to the proteins and Chelios channels. So the water has the information that the millivolts and anything else, what he found out about the difference of the normal bulk water, there must be an information, right? The Max Planck Institute in Germany found out, they measured the memory effect of water. It was just a few femtoseconds. So it's, I don't know, it's a billionth of a second. But I mean, that's just the beginning of finding out what will be the memory effect of water if you go to the Einstein-Rose condensate, where you are at 0 Kelvin. You run quantum computers. And so water could be like the fastest transmitter and receiver for memory. And also the Max Planck Institute found out that the water near the silicon dioxide freezed at minus 70 degrees. Water has a different program or a different coding, because nothing different, it's just H2O or H3O2 or whatever you want to name it. He tries to simplify, as you are doing it, Antoine. At the end you cannot say it's just H3O2, right? You have clusters, you have billions of clusters in just a sip of drinking water. We talked about scientific books and not esoteric books, so these are all the scientific books, and people will not understand if you come and say, yeah, you have cluster buildings and that. People, they will close the book after a few minutes.
Basically, the book from Gerald Pollack, The Fourth Phase of Water, the one you have open just right in front of you, is, even me, I can understand it. And I was always the guy at school, because you said at school we learned the 3 phases of water. I was doing advanced maths and physics, where you learn the thermodynamics, which tells you that there's 18 phases of water in the thermodynamics exception, but I never understood that. Whereas when I read that book, I understood it. So that's probably the reason why that book is known, and much less all the others which you have in front of you, because that one is understandable. But sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
I mean, you mentioned Einstein and Isaac Newton. I mean, I would like to quote here a little bit Mark Twain, who was saying, well, a man with an idea is a fool as long as the idea is accepted. So, and it's I mean, we're talking here
about... He read a book and he made a quote from Mark Twain. I don't know that guy.
I mean, we have a lot of ideas here together, right? I mean, we talked about the memory effect. We talked about easy, where everything comes together, and so on and so on. You brought a bunch of books which all are very, let's say, high level. But how does it come that you don't get this in school? That you don't teach that in school? I mean, there are a lot of, let's say, people out there and saying, well, some are okay, but it is not so important, and it's not really, I would not say measurable, but they see that in a critical way. The 4th phase of water. They do, right? Not everybody is saying, well, Gerald, we accept that, everything, we agree on what you're talking about. For instance, the best example is, I mean, he said clearly, and you mentioned that, it's H3O2. H3O2 is not H2O. So we have 2 different names in the first place, but in the end, they are 2 different molecules. So are we still talking about water?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we talk about, I mean, it's the 4th state could be more a plasmio state, right? I mean, plasma is all, it's the source of our universe. Before, everything was plasma. H3O2 is at the end, it's just a hexagonal state, right?
True.
The same what you found in bees, beehive. In nature, the hexagonal structure is the most stable and solid structure. You get on these numbers because if you calculate the bondings in the hexagonal structure, you have like the O's, which are just 1/3, and the H, the hydrogen, you have in the half. And then you calculate them together and divide them. And then you get like a -1 negative charge. And this is what he mentioned. Okay, you need negative charge. Peter Agnes got the Nobel Prize in 2003. He found out the aquaporins. These are the channels which absorb the water. Without these aquaporins, it's not possible. And so there came a lot of studies on the cluster buildings or how water must be cell and bioavailable. And this you can easily test, right? You go to genetists and you build some, I don't know, different cell cultures in the lab. You make it in vivo or in vitro studies. You measure different waters, right? And we measured also different waters because for sure we as Evodrop, we are like an engineering company for water treatment and water filtration. We spend a lot of money, but we wanted to figure out if it's possible, because when it's possible, I mean, it's incredible. You don't need any water softeners, anti-scaling devices, phosphates, which destroy the environment and the human health condition. But we find out it was just around 15 up to 30%. But there was an effect.
But especially the memory effect, I mean, was measured a couple of times. And not every time it was able to reproduce the results. So
yeah, true, but yeah, what I sorry to interrupt you, but what I have to say there, it's the same like if you want to measure earthquakes. You cannot measure the information of an earthquake. This is just going from me to you. What you can measure is the statistics. And we talk here about measuring information. As long as science do not accept, like, we just accept like these electromagnetism forces, right? But there is something more, because when people talk about, okay, spontaneous healing, right? People walk to Lourdes and they drink the water and they got healed. You can tell the same in medication, whatever, and there are some...
But isn't...
So you're saying it's not necessarily God which solves the... No, sorry, don't want you to open that box.
No, yeah, for sure it's not It's a critical point, because let's say if healing with Lourdes, it's more that people believe in that. But even if you measure the water there, it's completely different than the normal tap water which is coming from the same place. I'm a scientist, but I believe in something higher, because I mean, how it's the same like Einstein said, God is not gambling. There is no gamble here. It's everything, it's concrete. No doctor, no physicist, no biologist, no genetics has ever created a human. We think we know everything, but we don't know it. The same is like with homeopathy, right? If you compare it with crystal forces or high delusions, I mean, there is nothing inside, really just an information. And there are randomized, double-blind and peer-reviewed studies which show that homeopathy working. And a lot of people think it's not working, but have they ever read these studies? No, they have not. They have just heard, okay, it's stupid, it doesn't work, whatever. And that's the problem of our society, who is
So
really
the
reading
decision
scientific-
makers.
Everyone thinks he's an expert, but he's just copying information from others.
I just want to say, because you said homeopathy, because there's, I mean, it's an interesting aspect, because you're saying, well, the decision makers who decide whether it works or not are not the guys who really know everything about what they decide about, right? So because exactly we have now the decision
It's not a matter of
in
decision makers.
Germany. We have now
No.
the decision in Germany that the politicians.
Germany again.
Yeah, come on, I'm living there. But we have now the decision that the people say, the decision maker, the politics, we will take that out from our health system. So what Fabio is saying, well, these guys, they decide, but they don't have all information. It's the same with the water, what we talk about, right?
I don't want to open the homeopathy box because
No, but it's the same. It's the
that
same.
is
It's
2
just
hours of discussion.
it's just an example, right?
What's interesting in what you explained to me is that there is the lens of what we understand, and we are judging whatever we know to the lens of what we understand. And if we don't read all these books and we don't understand the physics, then it sounds like esoteric, like straight out of the box. And I don't believe that everything is right. I don't believe that everything is wrong. I'm just looking at the way the ancient Romans were dealing with water. And they had specific waters for every specific use. And a good portion of that was because they believed in a bunch of divinities. But probably another portion of that was, hey, that water seemed to have that effect. We don't understand it. We don't know why, but it seems to be working. So the point here is what you were mentioning with Lourdes. It's maybe sometimes we have to accept that us, the general masses, we don't understand it. And that it's not necessarily wrong if we don't understand it, as long as we have scientifically proven authorities which tell us we've been reviewing it and it sounds legit, until the next scientist in 2 or 3 decades proves it wrong, because science is a moving ground.
But you said a very interesting point. But let's say
Always.
No, but the point with science is if someone says it is A, someone else needs to reproduce A. And for instance, just the memory effect, effect
absolutely.
was not able to reproduce everywhere. So the question is why? Are they just idiots who are not able to follow
Because
the guidelines?
There was a protocol.
Definitely, yeah. But what I have to mention here, I mean, it's that's
the
what
question
I
really is
said.
how
Yeah, that's
close
what I
are
said.
we? How close are we that we are saying, well, this is not really science. We go a little bit into the esoteric part. That is a question here.
Yeah, the word esoteric for me, it's a damaged word, right? Because I mean, esoteric,
Of course.
it's a point of view. It's the same like we live in an exoteric world, but esoteric just means have the view inside of you, and exoteric is outside. For me, esoteric is important because sometimes we search everything outside, but we have to come inside us to find the solutions. What Heisenberg said, the more you want to find out the spin of an atom, the less you know where it's located. The more you want to find out where it's located, the less you know the mass or the type of this.
This is fascinating, but I feel like totally illegit to discuss that because I have no clue about it. It's really interesting and really love to go into the depth of the story. But in order for me to try to understand it, I need to bring it back to water topics. I was just looking at some numbers. The ionizer market right now is $2.4 billion a year.
That's an education problem, right? If the people buy that stuff, well, I mean, you can't help them anymore, right? It's a little bit the point. But let's say coming back a little bit to to Pollack and the fourth phase of water, to a little bit to conclusion here, right? I mean, what is really the conclusion here for the water industry, for our industry? Isn't the conclusion, okay, we should challenge ourselves, that we should accept there are other ways how things work? I mean, even Pollack was saying, well, to use the fourth phase, to get an application for that or a technology for that is pretty hard. I mean, the fourth phase, he wrote the book 10 years ago, right? Until now, there's nothing which you can make out of that, a technology, right? Where you can win energy or whatever.
Yeah,
so what is
chicken and egg.
what
I mean,
what is the conclusion
if you
here?
don't believe it, then they don't fund it. If you don't fund it, then you don't get any outcome. I'm just saying you cannot judge.
No, I'm not judging. I'm just saying.
Even with
what
Pollack,
is the conclusion?
You need around $1 million. He mentioned that in the water conference, right? And no one is giving him this money. He had one philanthropist which supported him, but I think
1 million
it was
is nothing
over, and
today.
He didn't had any classes from the universities and got no support. All the scientists which I had a talk or video conference, they got no fundings. And we are building.
But what is the main
World Water
reason?
Community.
What
It's
is the
like
main
a Facebook
reason?
group. For me, I don't want to be as stigmatized as a conspiracist. I'm not. I'm critical against anything, because if you just do what everyone is telling you, you will not have an inspiring way.
One very important stuff about what you're saying here, which to me is a learning and an outcome, is you are really dealing with water as a health topic, which means it changes the lens at which you look at it, because it means all of a sudden water becomes a competitor to these pharmaceutical companies. Water becomes something you have to assess with medical studies and not with chemical analysis. And that shifts a bit the paradigm, and probably that's the reason why it's difficult to bring the message across, because it changes the way you deal with it. There's not an absolute.
Yeah, definitely. But the same you have, for example, at pharmaceuticals, the same you have with vaccine. I mean, for example,
Yes.
when I was in
Pharmaceutical
Africa,
vaccines.
so there is never, ever 100% accuracy, even in pharmaceuticals. And
But we are talking about an image problem. So that means we are somehow here. That means we are thinking outside the box. We have some of these ideas, like from Pollack or all the studies you mentioned, but they are not able to break through because they are stigmatized and they have an image problem. That's why they don't get a funding in our water industry, which they need to get the technology available for bigger scale.
What I'm really curious about is that there's about it's off the I mean, you don't see it on camera probably, but there's about 12 books in front of you. We've mentioned the fourth phase of water here, which is
Was our starter, right?
probably a good starter. But from those books, which one would you recommend us?
yeah, if your language is like German, I would recommend from Professor Dr. Ulrich Warnke, Bionisches Wasser.
Can we show
It's
it?
like, yeah.
Think about the water industry. So the water industry, which
It's
book
like
they
that.
should read?
He summarized a lot of different, also Pollack and Vladimir Voykov and Konstantin and all these. This is the Russian book from these scientists, because that's also a problem from our Western civilization, right? If you talk from people from China or from Asia or from Russia, they're much more open about that, and they know that
It's a
they
different
have
culture.
the ancient culture which said, okay, the healing properties of water, the investigation and the reputation of ancient healers.
We should have a top 10 list, right, of the books everybody in the water industry should have read.
I will give you all the links from the books, or because I think it's really important. This is also a really good book because he's also summarize a lot of things. It's in English, so you have some book in German and some in English, and it's also not like books like where you have the miraculous structure, which a lot of chemical formulas where the people think, okay, what's happening there? I don't understand any word. You have a lot of these books here for sure, and that's not easy to read. You have to read, empathize and fascinated by this topic. The most of the books I had read 3 times, and I just have 10 or 20% of the books manifested inside me because it's so complex.
I think we've been scratching the surface of the topic, which is crazy because there's much more to dig into, but we have to be cautious of our viewers' time at some point, because they need to start somewhere, and we gave some hints at where to start. I think you gave a bunch of very fascinating indications as to why it makes sense to start digging into, because there's a word to unveil. So I would bring back home your 2 book advices, so the Bionisches Wasser from Ulrich Warnke and the Water Codes from Dr. Colin O'Day. And then once I'm done with those 2 ones, probably I'll go to the 12 others. But thanks a lot for the advice.
We can have a book
You're
club,
welcome.
right? You can open a book club, guys.
Yeah.
You've read a book, so finally you're
Instead
part of the
of
club.
baby club.
Believe me, I read more books than you believe. Anyway, thanks a lot, Fabio. Was pretty much interesting. We took something with, and hopefully a lot of stuff really hit our audience as well, that they got the glimpse out of that to, let's say, to be more open-minded, right? You don't have to believe that, but let's say you should have a kind of open mind, right? And that's why, thank you very much, Fabio, for being with us today.
Thank you too for the invitation.
Antoine, that was intensive.
Yeah, a lot of information. I'm a bit overwhelmed. So much information and so much new books to read. And I know you're reading books. It was just to make a joke, because usually you make jokes with me because you say, oh, you still read another book. But
Are you crying right now? A little bit about...
Should I?
Yeah, a little bit. Sounds like
Why?
that I'm always doing jokes about you. Hey, come on. I'm
Yeah,
just...
Everybody knows you're the bad guy.
Yes, I know. I'm the German, so I'm always a bad guy. I'm used to that. We started really with, just the last section with Pollock, Gerald Pollock. We talked about the 4th phase of water. Honestly, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced about the 4th phase. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, or it does exist, but I think there's definitely something in the middle, right? And we should really a little bit, especially me, open our mind for other things. And that's what I see in our industry. We are really, you can say it about me as well, that I'm really not as open-minded as I should be. But look at here, what Fabio told us today. There's so much between the lines, what we don't know so far. He gave you 12 books, or asked 12 books to read. I'm pretty sure there's so much information we have never heard about, right?
The question is what to do with information, because whenever you're opening that box of starting to treat water as a health topic, which probably it is, it fully shifts the way you look at it, and that is something we as a sector are maybe not fully ready to do. So that might be the reason why you mentioned how 1 million shouldn't be a big topic to raise in the water sector, but if you come with something which is whether in the line of something which is existing or something which clearly says, oh, this is existing, but I'm doing this like 30 or 50% better, and then yes, you can raise that 1 million. But if you come and you say, by the way, my competitor is not really water or the way it's treated, but my competitor is that pharmaceutical company, then yeah, there is this preconception. I think Fabio was right to correct me when I'm saying it's esoteric, because esoteric has already a meaning. When you say esoteric, you're giving a taint to whatever comes after it. But still, you have to deal with those preconceptions, and I still believe that we should find a way to make it more tangible for people to understand what this is all about.
Exactly. As I mentioned during the discussion, I talked yesterday to my 13-year-old son, and I told him what I'm going to do today, and I talked with him about 4th phase of water, and he said, very interesting question. Why? What is it about? How does it help us? And that's really a question we should always keep in mind. A lot of stuff is really just about scientific, that we discover something new. But if it comes really to the industry, to the water industry, to our space, how can we use it? How can it help us to solve the global problems we have?
So actually for you out in the comments there, I'd be interested, because I know I've been talking with some of you when I made my interview of Gerald Pollock a while ago on my podcast, and many of you had very interesting thoughts on the topic. Some were really against it, some really in favor of it, and many just brought me some additional stuff, some additional food for thought. So I'd be really interested, now that you've listened to Fabio, and which went really into a hell of details and a lot of valuable insights, what's your feedback? What do you believe, and what do you think will be the applications of all of that in the close future? So I'm curious about that.
Absolutely. So, final words. Thank you very much. Thank you, Antoine.
Thank you, Björn.
This time we met here in beautiful Switzerland. So last time we have been to France. So what is the next stop?
Good question. Hey,
We will meet again very soon. Pretty sure somewhere else, maybe in Germany. And thank you, Antoine, again. Thank you, everybody, for watching the show. See you very soon.
See you
Thank
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.